But we begin with new images of the oil leak that's still gushing a mile beneath the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. What you're looking at here is the leak, the main oil leak on the ocean floor that is the cause of the environmental disaster looming over the entire Gulf region. This is one of the two leaks at the Deepwater Horizon well that has resulted in more than 4 million gallons of oil being dumped into the Gulf of Mexico so far. Up to this point, most of what we've seen are images of oil slicks on the surface of the water. But BP finally released this video tonight, apparently under pressure from federal officials. The Deepwater Horizon's rig is, of course, located in the Gulf of Mexico. It's now sunk on the ocean floor about 40 miles off the coast of Louisiana. The company that owns the rig, Transocean, is based in Switzerland. The company that leased the rig and is now trying to clean up the mess is, of course, BP, B as in Britain. They're headquartered in London. Now, these offshore rigs are technically ships. They can move around. So even though they're giant skyscrapers on water, they have to be flagged as if they are boats, as if they're ocean-going sea vessels. That means they have to say what country they're coming from. You want to know where this Swiss rig, leased by a British company to drill American oil, is flagged? It flies the flag of the Marshall Islands. Huh? Where are the Marshall Islands? All the way over, keep going, oh yeah, over here. A tiny little cluster of islands, sort of off the northern coast of Australia, maybe. Roughly the same size population as the town of Palo Alto, California. Now, was this giant rig built in the Marshall Islands? No, it was built in South Korea. Is this giant rig helmed by people from the Marshall Islands? Not that anybody knows of. Are any of the companies involved here headquartered in the Marshall Islands? No. So why does this giant oil rig have the flag of this teeny tiny, totally unrelated country? Oh, right. Because the Marshall Islands have relatively lax maritime regulations. You see, where you're flagged isn't just a matter of what sort of taxes you pay and stuff. It's a matter of what sort of safety regulations you are held to. The U.S. Coast Guard, which goes around inspecting vessels in U.S. waters for obvious reasons, inspects foreign-flagged rigs a little differently.
How many wells do they drill in the Marshall Islands?
I don't know. Of the Deepwater Horizon, obviously never drilled. It's what's called a flag of convenience in the sense that the Marshall Islands, they're flagged under the Marshall Islands. They meet the standards that the Marshall Islands Registry proposes. A classification society goes on board on behalf of the Marshall Islands Registry and makes sure that they, in fact, comply with all those standards.
See, inspectors from the Marshall Islands Approved Classification Society go on board, and then Coast Guard officials essentially verify those findings. Had this oil rig been flagged as an American vessel, a U.S. vessel, while it was pumping American oil, the Coast Guard would have conducted the inspections themselves, and U.S. regulations are, of course, more stringent than Marshall Islands regulations. Nobody's saying that that would have prevented this disaster, but the fact that this rig inexplicably chose to fly the flag of the Marshall Islands when it had nothing to do with the Marshall Islands tells you a lot about the relationship between regulators and inspectors and safety monitors and the companies that try to evade them. In our country, the agency that regulates offshore oil drilling is the Minerals Management Service, the MMS. And based on what's come out in the last few weeks, it sort of seems like in recent years, MMS just gave up the job of being a constructive antagonist to the oil industry. A Wall Street Journal examination found that over the last decade, MMS, quote, shifted most of the job of crafting safety regulations to the oil industry itself. Neat. Before this disaster ever happened, the MMS was famous as the agency where a manager snorted crystal meth off a toaster oven. That turned up in an Inspector General report. It was where the agency's oil industry regulators were quite literally shtupping oil industry lobbyists. Not metaphorically shtupping them, literally shtupping them. Now, in the wake of this disaster, the Obama administration is proposing a major overhaul of the Minerals Management Service. They're proposing breaking the agency up. Meanwhile, the investigation into why the BP disaster happened is still underway in Washington. A day after oil executives from BP and Transocean and Halliburton all tried to pin the blame on each other for this disaster, the chairman of a top House committee today put the blame squarely on all of their shoulders.
This catastrophe appears to have been caused by a calamitous series of equipment and operational failures. If the largest oil and oil service companies in the world had been more careful, 11 lives might have been saved and our coastlines protected.
Regardless of which corporation ends up taking on the lion's share of both the blame and the financial responsibility, the bottom line here is that with offshore drilling, it is indisputable that what we have been doing is something that we don't know how to do safely. That is proven by the fact that every single technological solution that has been used to try to stop this thing, you keep hearing this, every single technological solution they are trying has never before been used at this depth. You keep hearing that over and over again, right? It's been more than 3 weeks since this disaster first struck, and this remains the scene, a mile underwater, tonight, right now. Oil companies are approved to drill at this depth, even though they have no idea how to fix it if something goes wrong at this depth. And we're drilling deeply more now than we ever have before. In 1990, deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico produced 20,000 barrels of oil a day. 20,000. By last year, that had jumped to 1 million barrels a day. But the fact that we don't know how to do it safely has never really been a political problem until now.
I ask whether or not all three of you can separately guarantee that a spill like this will never happen again in U.S. waters on your watch. Mr. May.
I cannot guarantee that.
Mr. Newman.
I cannot guarantee it.
Mr. Probst.
But I'm afraid that with the best will in the world, I don't think any individual could guarantee that we will not see another oil spill as a result of drilling activity. Yeah.
In the shadow of the BP oil disaster jaw-dropping hearings, Senators John Kerry and Joe Lieberman introduced climate change legislation in the Senate today, the American Power Act. Among other things, it includes subsidies for offshore oil drilling. Subsidies, taxpayer subsidies. These oil companies already don't pay federal royalties on anything that they drill out there. But how about expanded taxpayer subsidies for them to do it too, to do it more? This is, not to put too fine a point on it, our oil. And yet we're paying them to drill it. And then we're not collecting a percentage from it, even though it's ours and even though we bear the environmental disaster risk whenever anything goes wrong. The blood pressure down news about the new climate bill is that coastal states will now be able to veto any new drilling projects within 75 miles of their coastlines. Now, one coastal state governor, Charlie Crist of Florida, is already taking preemptive action. Governor Crist is asking Florida state legislators to approve a state constitutional amendment in Florida to ban oil drilling in state waters forever. It's already a state law there, but a constitutional amendment would make it essentially permanent. Governor Crist used to be a supporter of offshore drilling, but apparently in the wake of this disaster, he has changed his mind, as have a lot of Americans, if you put any stock in the recent poll numbers on this issue. Whether this is just politics or an honest change of opinion on this, it's worth noting that not every politician is reacting to this disaster in the same way that Governor Crist in Florida is. Take Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, for instance. Looking at the same set of facts, looking at the same disaster, she reacted to the crisis this way.
The record will show that from 1947 until 2009, 175,813 barrels have been spilled out of 16 billion produced. That is 1,000th of 1% of total production.
See, that's supposed to be the good news. This is no big deal. It's such a tiny percentage of what we produce. Why let a little spill like this bother you? This is 1,000th of 1% of total production. There is so much more that could spill, says the senator whose own state is staring down the barrel of 4 million gallons of coastal oil and counting. Joining us now live from Venice, Louisiana, is NBC News Chief Environmental Affairs Correspondent Ann Thompson. Ann, thank you so much for your time tonight. What can you tell us about the very latest on the effort to cap this well?
Well, Rachel, they are pursuing something called the Top Hat, and that is a smaller containment dome. It is down on the sea floor. And over the next 24 hours or so, engineers hope to actually move it over the biggest leak there. And what they're hoping is this time they have solved the problem of those ice-like crystals called gas hydrates, which felled the big giant containment dome over the weekend. And they think they've solved this by attaching a riser, which is a big pipe, and then there is a pipe within that, and they will use warm water and methanol to keep the top hat warm and the gas hydrates at bay. So that's what they're counting on. They're also looking at another option, and that is called an insertion tube. It's basically taking a riser, again a pipe that has a drill pipe inside, and attaching it to the broken riser and then pumping the oil out that way. And the third option they're looking at is something called a junk shot. That could take place as early as the middle of next week, and that is